And then this song kind of evolved that I wrote into the book. Lisa Sunshine is like, oh, I hear an anthem in this song. And then all of a sudden it was going to be, like, it was in line to be nominated for a Juno.
Imagine the excitement of our next guest, having written a children's book and her words being turned into a song. Noah tells us all about it in this episode, so stick around.
Welcome to 85 After School. I'm your host, Nicole, and this is the podcast about teacher career and retirement planning through real-life stories of those who live it.
So I'm so excited to have Noah with me today as our next guest. You're such a ball of energy, Noah. I can't wait for you to share all the wonderful stories. Welcome to the show, Noah.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole.
So I did hint a little bit. Maybe you can share with the listeners how you found your pathway to teaching. What enticed you to step into that career?
Well, funny enough, I didn't do it intentionally. It happened almost haphazardly because I had been tutoring all of my young life, and I was a math helper for those extra points we used to be able to get for helping out in our spares in high school. And all of a sudden I went to university and there was something really missing from my life. And I was studying social work because I always wanted to make an impact. And I was like, but I need to be around students. So then I became a youth advisor. And in doing that, I was like, no, this is for real. And then I did some volunteer work with autistic children and supporting in different classrooms. I was like, this is where I was meant to be. So that's really how I became a teacher. And I did not have the easiest time in the faculty. And that was really great preparation for what the career was going to hold. And I really feel so lucky. I'm in my 29th year of teaching and I feel young and fresh, even though I feel seasoned and professional.
You hinted a little bit that the faculty wasn't the easiest journey. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, sure. Just like teaching, we have these compartments and ways that systems are organized, and they don't always go with learners. And it's always the funniest thing when teachers find themselves as learners and find them challenged. So I would be in these situations. For example, I was in my second placement in a grade 2 class, and the teacher said, okay, we're going to start a community unit. Can you prepare some materials around policemen and firemen and other community helpers? And I said, can I use the term police officer? Is it okay with you if I use firefighter? And that upset her so much, she had me kicked out of class.
Oh, no.
And I thought that, it was really a terrible situation. And I thought, okay, here I am. But it started helping me to understand and look for gatekeepers. And I was really lucky to get to write a chapter for Barbara Braesbrook that came out last year on gatekeepers. And I think it's something that all educators should be aware of. There are people who are there to help you in gatekeeping, to help you be the caliber that you need to be to move to the next level or to get through that obstacle. And then there are people that will keep you out, sometimes for their own inadequacies and sometimes because they just don't like you. And that is something you need to come to terms with as an educator, because you have all these different people that you have to navigate relationships with, not just your coworkers and the people in the system, but parents and other educators and your students. And the more flexible and the more amenable you are to challenging scenarios and willing to build that toolkit to handle them, the better your career will be to navigate.
What an unfortunate situation, but you rose above that, Noah. Interesting.
Oh, sure. I mean, in my first year teaching, I'm a sit on the desk kind of teacher, and I have been for 29 years. And a woman who's a lovely educator came by my classroom and she said, you get off that desk. How dare you sit on a desk? You walk the lanes and you talk to the students only as a professional and you don't share your personal life. And you learn to listen with an open mind to people and say, maybe there's something of value here. And you also learn to say, no, this is really who I am. And this is part of my teaching practice. And I'm still a sit on the desk kind of teacher and it works really well for me. But there are people that are going to tell you and give you direction. And it's important to be open to them. Life is full of mentors and you should be looking for direction when there is good direction. And you should be accepting direction that might not be for you and just be respectful to the person who's handing it out, unless it's your principal who's evaluating you. And that's a different situation.
Yeah, absolutely. We learn to navigate the interpersonal relationships we have with colleagues and our administrators, and we find a pathway where we're still able to be authentic to ourselves in our teaching, but hopefully also ignite a little bit of change and fire in others, right? Because we don't want to become stagnant. I'm wondering, how did your pathway unfold once you championed through the Faculty of Education and became a certified teacher?
I actually had a really funny story. I started in independent schools, and on my first day of supply teaching, all of the students wrote to the principal to hire me. And it was very cute and very enthusiastic, and I got hired, and I had this really wonderful year teaching grade 6. And then I took over student council, and I started to use these co-curricular opportunities to help students learn outside the classroom and not for grades. And in doing that, I really deepened my approach to teaching. And so over the years, I predominantly taught 6, 7, and 8 in a middle school. And then after my first daughter, I have 3 of them. I went on mat leave thinking, okay, no problem. I'll be back in a year and maybe longer. And then we moved to a house in Toronto and that affordability wasn't there. So I had to go back to work earlier. So I ended up at a different campus of my school teaching elementary. And I was like, okay, primary is different than junior intermediate. And I was really unsure. And in teaching students at the very elementary level of reading, I became a better teacher of 6, 7, and 8. And it really opened my eyes to the differences between teaching students how to read and teaching students about the value of reading and how to create meaning from those experiences. And then I went back to teaching middle school for several years. And then 8 years ago, I was trying to make a choice about where the rest of my life was going to go in education. And I left the comfort and the seniority and the tenure that I had in the independent school system. And I started as a supply teacher. And it was funny because in my last year, I'd taken the principal's course with all these people from the York Region District School Board. And I'm writing them as I'm being interviewed to be a supply teacher. And it was a juxtaposition that I actually am so glad I did, but it was a really hard ego moment for me. I'm writing to all these people who finished the principal's course with me, who are going to become administrators. And I realized that I didn't want to be a principal. I only ever wanted to be a VP. And in public school, you don't get to do that. So I really needed to be the teacher I believed that I could be. And I needed the spectrum of learners to prove to myself that I could be the teacher for everybody. And in the last 8 years of being in public school, I've learned a ton. And I feel like I'm closer to being the teacher I want to be. And I hope to feel that sense of arrival. I don't know that we ever really get there as teachers. We kind of reach this new summit and go, okay, there's something I want to get better at or deepen my understanding of, or there's a new ed tech strategy or skill, or AI comes to the forefront and you have to navigate these new waters. And so you really rely on a toolkit that you build over your many experiences to help you get through them.
No, I see you light up, and I wish the listeners could see you, because as you're speaking about your journey being in the private or independent school system and then taking that leap of faith, which a lot of teachers aren't necessarily risk takers, so they may never think about leaving the comforts and their security, and you jump to the public school system. And then you had your eye on perhaps administration, and you realized, I exemplify lifelong learning. I love teaching. I love trying out the art and science of teaching. And now you are working. It didn't take you long when you leaped over to the public system from supply teaching.
No, that was also crazy, because when I decided to become a supply teacher, I thought it would take me 5 years to get a contract. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to build my consulting practice over the next 15 years, and then I retire and I'll have a fully functional consulting practice. And day one of supply teaching turned into day 11, which became my first LTO. And then I got a second LTO, and then I got a contract. So I've tried to stay at 75%. I've gone a little above and a little below in certain situations so that I have this time carved out. And in those 8 years, I've hosted a podcast for educators, a live show every single Monday for 7 years. I hosted for 5. I built the Mentoree with a team of people to support educators at every stage of their career through various forms of mentorship. I wrote and published Strum and the Wild Turkeys. I've done a TED Talk. It's been an incredible time, but I think a lot of people are so afraid of the security piece, and rightfully so. You know, I was very lucky to know that I could afford to work part-time or supply teach for a bit. It was a conversation my husband and I sat down and did the math for. How long could we do this? And so his support was essential too in this leap of faith in myself, as much as it was a leap of faith in what was coming.
And it's really paid off for you. And I want to get a little bit into some of the amazing things that you're doing and your business as well. But before we jump to that, in the almost 30 years in education, can you share a most memorable moment of your career?
I think there are too many memorable moments, but I'm going to say it's those ahas and the navigating through the oh no's and the let's go's that have been the greatest moments, where you get to be there to witness the change in a person because they learned something, because they could do something, because they saw themselves in a new way.
And do you have any students that come back to you that remember you from maybe 20 years ago that are now adults living life in the world?
Well, I'm very lucky to say I have functional relationships with quite a few former students who will bring me their children and say, hey, Mrs. Daniel, look who I brought into the world. Or they become teachers and they tell me that I had something to do with it. I was actually, so in my children's book, I wrote a song that a band recorded called Sunshine and Broccoli. And I was at an event, and this former student of mine, I was in the middle of singing, and she's like, this makes perfect sense. This past year, when I moved to the school that I'm at now, a former student of mine's son is actually in my class.
Wow.
And how I figured it out was also like this beautiful moment. And I just had him come to speak to my students in December. And we told them afterwards that he was my student in grade 6, almost 30 years ago. Yeah, I live a beautiful life that way.
Oh, and the joy that brings you when you know that, former students have landed well on their feet. How great that some of them have become teachers themselves as well. Now, I know you're working still full time in York Region, but I don't know how you do it, Noah. You must not sleep. You've written a children's book. You've done a TED Talk. You've done a podcast, 2 podcasts. You're unstoppable. And you have a wonderful business called Mentoree. Maybe you can talk a little bit about each of those things.
I'm so happy to talk about them. I think in education, business is a tough word. I like to call it a social enterprise, the Mentoree, because I never intended to make a profit from it. And that can be really challenging because I've spent thousands of hours on it. But in truth, I intended to leave a legacy for educators to be able to see the value of mentorship in their lives, to know that they're not alone, that isolation of education, not just in the early career days, but in every change that comes with a new class of students or a new subject. I really wanted to build a space where people could come so that they weren't alone. And the Mentoree has been a passion project for me. We're pivoting now as a team. We've done some consulting work. We've built mentorship programs. We've written a chapter on mentorship for well-being. And I love to present to help boards and schools think about how to leverage mentorship in a very low-cost, high-impact kind of way. And that's where our work is really heading, to help people see those beats in between, where mentorship is a solution and a way to build well-being into professional learning, which can be a huge disconnect at times. But for me, I'm more entrepreneurial. So I love teaching, but it's not everything that I am. There are things that I do in the classroom that I get to dive deeper in through the work that I do. So my 3rd children's book, my first under my married name, came out 4 years ago this April. It's called Strum and the Wild Turkeys. And I was originally hired to write a story about a real world event. And this thing happened to this rancher, and he had a peacock that disappeared. And after a year of stress and mystery, they discovered it leading a pack of wild turkeys. And he called me and said, no, I need you to write a book. And I was working on the TED Talk at the time. So I actually said no. And I turned down some projects because there is not infinite time, but I like to dabble in all different kinds of creative spaces. And so when my TED Talk got moved from September to February, I was in the zone of this creative flow and found a story in researching peacocks and wild turkeys and discovered the vocalization part of it. So then I wrote the story about a peacock with an imperfect plume who finds his voice and then his band in a band of wild turkeys called the Wild Turkeys. And after I wrote it, I was like, guys, I know you really wanted this just for your family, but is it okay? I want to send it to a publisher. I need this in classrooms. I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. And not only did they enable me to build a website with all the content, but it was during COVID and I was able to speak to classes all around the world during the days. And then this song kind of evolved that I wrote into the book, but then the melody came and then the guys are like, let's put you together with somebody, connected me with Sunshine and Broccoli, who right away, Lisa Sunshine is like, oh, I hear an anthem in this song. She rewrote the song. And then all of a sudden it was going to be like, it was in line to be nominated for a Juno. And even if it wasn't, like the fact that I have had these opportunities because I dabble outside the classroom has kept me so excited to bring some of my ideas to the classroom and even to the world of the classroom. So, or the classroom as the world. So everything that I do is just an extension of things that I see in school. I call myself a teacher geek because that's my favorite kind of conversation. And not everybody is really into it or gets as excited about education, but really everything I do is about education. So when I say consulting work, I have, I do get paid for consulting work. I have worked with boards. I have worked with individuals. I have keynoted in different faculties and in different boards. But ultimately, I really just like to dance how I feel and create spaces where I can be creative and make an impact.
So I love that you are a author of multiple books. Maybe you can share the other two with us as well.
Absolutely. So in my second year of teaching, I was having a conversation with a guy that I was on a film festival committee with about this book he was working on that he had called Crazy for Canada. And I was like, you know what? No, sorry. He called it Lester B. Beaver and the Magic Map. I called it Crazy for Canada and rewrote it in prose that night. And he's like, I'm publishing this. And I was like, oh my God. And that became Tumble Books, which is everywhere. So you can find Crazy for Canada by Noah Schwartz there. And then he also published Old Timers, The One That Got Away, which was essentially the story of my grandfather going through Alzheimer's. So I was really lucky that Central Park Lodges partnered on that. And every person who went to Central Park Lodges got a copy of my book as part of a family package. So I've been, I was never going to publish again. I had been ghostwriting for years. And that's when Strum the Wild Turkeys became my first book published under my married name. And who knows what else I'll do in the writing world. I love to write. So all of that's still possible.
And if listeners want to grab any of your books, where can they get them?
Oh, Amazon, Indigo, pretty much everywhere.
I love it. And I'm positive you're going to come out with more books.
I still dream to write the entire series of Strum and the Wild Turkeys, and I'll let myself sometimes write subsequent stories, but who knows what will come of that.
It sounds like you're living the dream, Noah. That creativity and being able to be creative and extend that beyond is just fabulous. And what a reward. And I can't believe the song made it to the Juno nominations. That's incredible. It's
pretty amazing. Like I feel blessed, but I also work really hard, and opportunities are sometimes created by having all these synergistic conversations. So, in the 5 years that I produced and hosted on Ed Mentors, every one of those episodes, even though they might have come out in a timely manner, they're valuable still and they're available still. So I feel so excited to continue to be able to make ripples from the work I've already done. And I also feel hopeful that by the time I retire, I will know exactly what it is that I do. Because right now I do lots of different things and I'm trying to figure out, well, that's kind of where building outside the blocks came from. Like my mentor said to me, what is this thing you're doing in the classroom? You're taking these very rigid parameters and you're finding opportunities for students to build their creativity and sense of identity in school. And I was like, I don't know, I'm like building outside the blocks or something. And she spent weeks unpacking the idea. And I turned out like that's my approach to teaching and to consulting. Show me where the confines are, show me where the parameters are, and I'll show you opportunities to build beyond them without having to change them. Even if change is something that's necessary, I can deal with what we have and still find possibility.
I love that, Noah. And I wonder if not having started in the public school system, but starting in the independent school system, if that really nurtured your confidence and ability to be able to be more creative and keep that going now that you're in a more, I don't know, you can compare the systems. I was going to say more confined and top-down kind of system.
Well, it also depends on the leadership in the building. But I think that what it did are three things that I think that I had an advantage of even coming into public school. One was my ability to speak to parents, because parents as stakeholders is such an essential part of any private experience. They are walking with you the whole time. And I've never been afraid to contact a parent. I've never put it off. I always choose to communicate first and see them as valuable partners. And a lot of teachers are terrified of parents or treat them with animosity or fear. And that's something I came in without. I also had to fundraise. So I had to present a lot for, because money had to come into the system. So I think that helped give me opportunities to build my public speaking and my skill. But the other thing is there are so many opportunities to be creative that we don't see in the system that we get to look for. And that's, again, where mentorship can help, because unless you're talking to somebody who has other ideas, you're siloed into what you know, who you know, and maybe if you're lucky, somebody down the hall. If you build for yourself a mindset that you can learn from everybody, that somebody has something to teach you, and that you always have something to teach. At the Mentoree, we say we all have something to teach and we all have something to learn, because we do. There is no arrival. And if we embrace that and we understand that this lifelong learning journey is for educators and for students, then we embrace the unknown in a completely different way. And I think maybe those are the tools I came into public school with. But I also think it's just kind of how I roll. So whatever it is, I'm lucky to say it work. I do work hard. I'm very committed to my students. I've had to, at times, recombobulate and be equally committed to my family. Sometimes I choose my students over even my health. So that's a mature part of my journey in education that I hope to fully arrive at by the time I retire.
But it is a journey, as you say, right? So there are times where, in retrospect, we would have done it differently, but at the time we feel it's necessary. So I can certainly understand that. I want to talk a little bit more about the mentoring, because the provincial government in Ontario has set forth this onboarding with new teachers, and they have to go through NTIP. I know that other provinces are doing similar things. I often hear at the grassroots level, they think it's an add-on and it's not really helping. So I know you have very good advice when it comes to mentoring that actually makes a difference and doesn't feel like an add-on, and it changes the way that you grow as a teacher.
Well, I think there's a couple things that you're making me think of. So one is, I have a good relationship with Jim, who was the brain behind NTIP in Ontario. And one of the things that he talks about is, are you being mentored? Not do you have a mentor? And I think that that's really important in it not being an add-on. If you're being mentored, you're in an active relationship. It's not a checklist. It's not somebody who's been given to you. I am an NTIP mentor, and I'm a mentor at the Mentoree, and I'm a mentee at the Mentoree. And becoming a good mentor is about being present and listening. But so often it's just who you get, right? So you also have to be able to give yourself agency and permission to find another relationship if it's not working, to say, I feel safe to talk about these things with this person, but then to find another person that you feel safe to talk about these other elements. Because if you can't be vulnerable and say, I'm terrified to teach this topic, this child is really challenging me, you're always worried in your building about getting judged. You need to have the freedom to seek people, maybe inside your board, outside your building, maybe somebody somewhere else in the world, because there are universals to education. And I think that it really helps us stay connected and global to talk to people all over the world. So mentorship isn't just something that boards can add on. It's something that they can buy into to actually utilize the human capital that we say that we value in a way that impacts the individual. So just like we say, you're not learning unless you've learned it, like teaching is about learning, mentorship is about being mentored. So if you're in a mentorship relationship, you feel better, you feel cared for, you feel heard. If you're in a mentorship relationship and you don't feel those things, then it's an add-on. Then it's we have a mentorship program. So one of my greatest challenges was when I started teaching in the board, I went through NTIP. And I see this image of this empty vessel being poured into by their mentor. And that was their definition of mentorship. And when I do programs for different facilities or communities around mentorship, I start with what's your definition of mentorship? Because if you think that you're imparting knowledge in this unilateral relationship, that's not mentorship in its ideal form, but it certainly doesn't help in education. I could just go sit in a webinar for that. If you're in mentorship, you got to focus on the ship part, and that relationship needs to be built. It can't be imposed. People need time to do it, and people need the support. So NTIP mentors should be able to be certified as a mentor. So they should be able to get an accreditation for that. I have been an NTIP mentor for 4 years, and there's nowhere written that that's true, except maybe on my resume. If we're not celebrating mentorship in our boards, in our schools, then we're missing an opportunity that's right there. There's a lot of informal, beautiful mentorship that happens. But what happens to the people who don't have that, who don't have people that they trust? They need to be able to turn to someplace. And that's hopefully what the Mentoree will continue to be, even as we evolve to a more consulting-focused organization.
Such valuable vision of where mentorship should be for everyone. And I'm sure lots of listeners are listening to you and connecting with you and already thinking, this is the type of person that I would want to connect with. If people want to reach out to you, how would they do that?
I'm kind of easy to find. So on socials, I'm at I am Noah Daniel, Noa, N as in Nancy, O as in octopus, A as in apple, Daniel like the boy's name. I'm on LinkedIn. Check out on my website, buildingoutsidethebox.com. You can see my blog, you can see my projects, you can see some of the things that I do and learn more about the different things that we spoke about here today, Nicole. But those are all the different ways to get in touch.
And we'll make sure we put all your contact information in our show notes so that listeners can reach out to you. I want to pivot a little bit because you have so much wisdom. What advice would you have for beginning, middle, and late career teachers in relation to their own career planning?
Okay, so I see career planning a lot like unit planning. So when you are first to teaching, a unit plan can seem really esoteric, but the more acclimatized you are to the terrain, you can build a unit plan and feel a lot freer to navigate to different places en route to the same final destination. And when you're much more seasoned, you can plan a final destination, go off on all these different cool tangents, and then reroute yourself because you see that there's a greater symphony on the horizon. I think that what happens in early career is you're in survival mode. And I would say at the beginning, find your mentors, build your team, and remind yourself that there's always agency, even though it feels like it's happening to you. In middle career, I would say start thinking about how you would backwards design your life so you can seek opportunities. Because if you're lucky, you have a principal who nurtures and mentors you, because I have one, but not everybody has one who looks at you and says, you could try this or you should be this. And if you don't have that tap on the shoulder, you know that you can tap yourself on the shoulder. And I think a lot of middle career educators forget that because they've been in it so long. And then coming to the end, which is where I am, I'm really backwards designing from a legacy place and from a place where retirement isn't just sitting at the cottage and checking out the world, although I anticipate doing that at some point. But for me, retirement is planning my day, being able to give back in the ways that I want to continue in education in a completely different way, but never to fully leave education, just more to create a space that I've decided on my own hours. So I think that beginning, middle, and end career educators have different opportunities, but they should always be seeking where their own agency and their own self-determination can be factors and not feel like it's always happening to them.
I love that idea of backwards planning because we're pedagogically trained to be able to do it. So I love that idea. If you were to, roll back with all the wisdom that you have now and roll back to when you first stepped out of the Faculty of Education, would you have changed the way that your career unfolded?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I would change how it unfolded. I think I would trust myself more in the process. I think that there were times where the obstacles of identity and gatekeepers were so overwhelming that they derailed me. And I wish that I wasn't, even if I learned in that beautiful mess. I really wish they didn't. I think that some of those scars I still wear. So I think that I would have probably navigated it a little bit differently with a little bit more strength and trusting in myself.
Yeah, I was going to say trust that inner voice, but I mean, we all start out the same way. We think others know more just because they've been standing in the same classroom for longer, right? So
yeah, and like hindsight is 2020. I look back and go, oh, I could have, would have, should have done that, but I didn't. And here I am. And I'm so grateful for where I am, and all the scars included.
Absolutely. They make us who we are, for sure. Without getting too personal, I'm wondering, now that you've backwards planned and you're closer to that retirement pivot, to all the other creative fun things that you're working on, is there any type of retirement planning that you have done that is working well for you?
I think it's just the planning part. I think that, you come to a point in your career where you have to financially plan for retirement. You have to cognitively plan for what your time will look like. You have to familially plan for what your role will be. My children are probably 10 years from having kids. And so I feel really good about working for myself and self-directing my days as my retirement. I think that that's beautiful noise I'm excited to experiment with, but with the financial stability of a proper retirement. And so that's something to continue grappling with. But there's some great retirement coaches out there today. And I really suggest you get some good advice, because even though boards have wonderful information and sometimes they have sessions for you and webinars to think about retirement, you need time to think about yourself in the picture of retirement, and you deserve to get the support that you need to do it with integrity.
I think what you've done well, Noah, over the years in your decades-long career in education is that you've always worked on your identity at the core as an educator, but how does that translate in different environments? Noah, we've reached the part of the show where I ask my guests to contribute a gem. So that one nugget or piece of advice that will remind our educators like yourself, struggling or championing through the day, every single day in classrooms, and will give them that hope and wisdom to move forward in their careers.
You are an essential part of your teaching equation. And so you can be a subject of circumstance, or you can help to write your own story. And I think you should always remember that there's room for that, even if you're navigating what's happening to you. And I think that who you are matters every single day.
That's well said. Thank you. I really appreciate that, Gem, and I know the listeners will as well. Noah, it's been such a joy speaking with you. I feel energized. I have creative juices flowing now, and I have to get it out. Thank you so much for taking the time and speaking with us today.
It's been such a pleasure, Nicole. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you know when new episodes are uploaded. We'd also love to hear your feedback. Leave a review or connect with us on Instagram or Facebook at 85 After School. Hey, if you're interested in being a guest, be sure to email us directly, 85afterschool@gmail.com. That's 85afterschool@gmail.com. Until the next episode, be good to yourself.